Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everyone to our Strategy and Advocacy Committee workshop that's today being presented by the team. And our topic today is Council Community Housing Review. So welcome to everyone and also those that are joining us online. I know Dr. Kata Stewart from the team will be supporting the presentation material today with Victoria. And then also apologies from Mia Mel Tevendale for attending this workshop as well today. I just also want to just lightly touch on the topic of um, this workshop today that we'll be covering is really around the process and then just putting some structure in terms of the review that's happening, but also I just want to touch on just the respect and level of sensitivity that we should adhere to because there are tenants, like members of our community that are also live tenants in our community housing. So we just want to keep that at the top of our mind as well as we're discussing this, that it is with them, not to them and against them. So I'll pass that over to Joe O'Neill. Thank you.
Just an apology for lateness from Councillor Linwood as well.
Yes, thank you.
Kia ora tātou. So this morning we're going to have a workshop which aligns with the community housing review which is occurring and aligning with a review of policy relevant to this. So the history of community housing for councils is that we do have significant populations of vulnerable people who are often living in council properties. And many councils in the past have made the decision due to the increasing costs to maintain those properties to either externalise them, have somebody else manage and care for them, or to actually gift them to community housing providers, remembering that council doesn't have the opportunity to access the IRRS system, which enables filling the gap between what we can charge people within the social and community housing sector and what the actual cost of rent for such a property would be. So this is a complex situation, but it's a review that is overdue for council. And as Councillor Hannah stated, it is important to take into consideration that these are vulnerable people often living within these properties, the vast majority of who are older, and I realise our policy is over the age of 60, so many of them will be much older than that. But this review is important to align council to what we can achieve for the future and what our commitment to these assets are. So with that, I'll hand over to Victoria and Dr. Stewart. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I could just move to the next slide, please, Ellie. Just a quick overview in terms of what we're covering in the next 55 minutes or so. Acknowledging that this review has been ongoing for some time and some councillors would have been privy to previous updates on the review, but also acknowledging that some around the table were actually new. So we kind of have to just backtrack a little bit in terms of the make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of the process and where we're kind of heading. So we just want to cover what are we doing and why are we doing it, and then provide a bit of a snapshot in terms of our current portfolio, but also the wider context around demographics and demand across the district. Then we'll touch on some of the key considerations we consider we'll need to touch on throughout the review and the way we might analyse our options as we go forward. And then lastly, but most importantly, as important as anything else, is the engagement side in terms of what we've done to date and the next steps with that. Next slide, thanks, Ellie. So we've just broken this down into the key drivers for the review. So there are a number of drivers here. They're not in any particular order, but we do have a very outdated policy which was developed in 2007, which really hasn't been really well reviewed since that time. It's been very light touch through the years. A Obviously, we have a little bit of legislative uncertainty around the wellbeings being removed from Local Government Act and, council's role in this space. We have some obviously financial constraints of council to consider going forward, and also there is some strategic policy commitments. We've got a district-wide healthy homes for all community housing strategy, which seeks a variety of housing types, sizes and tenures to meet the community's diverse social and cultural need. At the core, though, is really what is the role for council and community housing going forward? And Joe's introduction kind of briefly touched on that. That's sort of the high level. Are there any questions before we move on around the what and the why?
Thank you, John.
Just, Victoria, what is our question, percentage of housing available to the total population?
I might just pass it on to Kayla. She doesn't really know the details of that. Would you like to answer that, Kayla, please?
Yeah, so, well, if we're looking at sort of our over 60 population, that would be 1.2%.
Just curious, we've got 91 houses or units, we're housing 96 people. But the report you've given us also indicates that community housing, although it was intended to be self-funding and stand alone, now requires rate subsidisation. So can officers advise, as of today, how much in the way of rate subsidy is being provided? I would have thought that's a really important question and that you guys should have the answer to that.
Are you good to answer that, Kayla?
Well, I think this is part of the review process itself, is actually doing a deep dive into those numbers. So those numbers are constantly changing with the increases in costs that we're facing across the board. And so making sure that we do this review properly means having a really good handle on those numbers. Like you said, these are things we need to know. So that's what's underway at the moment to give us a more in-depth look at those. So I can't tell you right now, but what I can tell you is that that's what part of this review entails, is getting a sense of those numbers.
Thanks for that, Kayla. Joe.
I think probably just to add to that great point, Kayla, is that from a budgeting perspective, the budgets would sit not necessarily just in one department either. We have facilities and property, and then it's reactive maintenance. And so the budgets are across council. So it isn't like we have a specific budget line that's just doing one thing, which is these properties. So the deep dive is really important, as is the planning for the maintenance for the future and the costs incurred with that.
Sorry, I don't mean to be quarrelsome, but the first page of Victoria's report says that we expect the current housing funding model to continue requiring rates subsidisation, with insurance, maintenance, management and asset depreciation costs all forecast to increase. Now, I would have thought that with that level of information, you guys could give us a plus or minus 10 or 20% estimate of the rates impact now.
I think from what the team are advising us, Jim, is that the information is still being assessed through this review, that they want to do a more accurate deep dive and they want that opportunity. So I think we'll just kind of cover off some of the key considerations as part of it. It's a good question, but I think we'll allow them to continue with the presentation, and then that can be something that we can put in terms of including as part of the important criteria, because that is important, I acknowledge. Thank you.
Just while we're on that topic, is it possible, so we're doing this deep dive now, working out how to do the numbers and which departments they're coming from. Once we've done that, will we be able to have those at our fingertips at any point in the future once we've done this work, rather than waiting for the next review?
I think that's a good question that we could include as part of it.
I'd like to say yes, something to aim towards, but I think as Joanne was saying, it's quite complex in terms of multiple budget lines. Yeah, definitely something to aspire to.
I
Yeah,
think
I'll
it'll
just
be, yeah. Oh, sorry, Kayla, I'll allow you.
Sorry, just to add as well, so part of the review process includes a condition assessment of our assets. So in order to know how much they're going to cost us in the future, we've needed to undertake that work, and that's a significant piece of work that's required physical inspections of all of the units. And so just to reiterate, so that we can have the most accurate information, we need to do these, the asset management, look across all the different departments and all the different costs so that we can give you those numbers and they can be the most accurate that they can be. So yes, to your question, we do want to have that information, but there's some work that's got to go into it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because I do understand that we'd probably need to do some more work around the maintenance plans for each of the properties, which goes hand in hand with that. Okay, thank you.
So just to touch on the key steps, so we've done some work around the current state, and we're currently doing a deeper dive into the financials as we've just been discussing. Looking at, the sustainability of maintaining the current approach versus other options that we might want to consider. And then we're going to look at alternative models or alternative ways that potentially could be delivered, and develop sort of issues and options to bring back to elected members sort of around October this year, once we've done the deep dive and the asset condition assessment information is all at hand. We've got the evidence base there. And then we're looking to provide sort of a recommended option that council would like to consult with the community on. And then we're hoping by June next year to have this kind of all complete. We've set sort of a time frame of before September, but ideally before the end of next financial year. That's kind of like the key steps. We'll touch a little bit more on the engagement a little bit later in the presentation. Any questions on the steps at the moment before we move on to a bit more of a context of the portfolio and the wider context?
Very quick one about timing. Again, your report here says that you're expecting a decision by September, but did I hear you just say now that you'd like everything sorted and a decision reached by June? So what you're saying is that this may be a matter that we can include in next year's LTP. Is that correct?
So we're talking about June 2027. So it's probably a little bit beyond well, I guess it's a little bit late in the piece in the LTP, but yeah, ideally as early as possible. I guess we've got to remember that we've got, tenants to consider here, and we can't make too many promises in terms of our commitments. We're already a little bit behind in our review at the moment. So yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide, which is the snapshot of our portfolio, just as a refresh for some bit in terms of the stock we've got at the moment. Kayla's going to run us through this.
Yeah, so as we've got there, we've got 91 units and we currently have 96 tenants. And so the bulk are in Oamaru, but we also have a significant number in Palmerston, and then we have just 3 in Hampden, and they're currently 100% occupied. And because our criteria prioritises those over 60 with limited means, naturally our tenant makeup is over 60s. And so there's a variable rent, which is based on the location and also whether it's a bedsit or a separate bedroom. And what we do at the moment is set the rent at 85% of market. That's set every 3 years using a valuation. And then in the interim years, we increase the rent based on cost increases, and those are spread across the portfolio. Then you get to the 3rd year reset again. So in terms of other social housing in the district, primarily that's provided by Kāinga Ora. Then we also have Salvation Army, who are a registered community housing provider, and they have 9 homes. We've only had 6 additional homes over the past year for our district. So not a great increase, despite increases in the social housing waitlist during that period. As Joe mentioned at the beginning, registered community housing providers can access government funding. That's known as the income-related rent subsidy. So they can charge the tenant a maximum of 25% of their income for rent, and then the government tops them up to the 100% of market rent. So that's funding that we can't access. So then naturally as well, it becomes no surprise, as we've talked about, our financial losses are expected to continue and also increase. To move to the next slide.
Thank you, Kayla. France has a question.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Can we just go back to slide, please, Ali? So I don't know a heck of a lot about it, but I'm learning as I'm sitting here. So here's the question. If we already have Kāinga Ora basically doing the same thing, is there an obligation that we as council have to continue with community housing, or is it an option to divest these community housing and pass on to Kāinga Ora, and therefore reducing our risk in terms of having to provide financial support to it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in that. So at the moment, well, historically, Kāinga Ora has had a needs-based assessment. So those have prioritised based on need, but at the moment that's shifted to prioritise families. So older folk aren't going to be prioritised for that social housing. So the reality is they're likely to be on the waiting list. The other thing is that historically some councils have offloaded their portfolio, whether to Kāinga Ora or to a CHIP, and they've received the government funding to go along with that. But unfortunately, that's not the case under the current settings. So any social housing funding in the South Island is limited, additional funding, so new places, is limited at this point to Christchurch only. So unfortunately, the reality is, while we're looking at all the options, divesting to Kāinga Ora at this point in time wouldn't be one of them.
Thank you. Yes, Dan.
Thanks, Kayla. Just a question with regards to the size of the waiting list. And it would just seem to me from what you said, was it 3 or 9 externally houses in the last period of time were built? That seems that they're not rushing towards creating more homes. Are we going to reach a point, presumably if there's a wait list, there's not enough supply for the demand that's there. Are we looking at a trajectory where it's actually going to get worse over a period of time?
Yeah, that's what the social housing register waitlist would suggest. So over the last 5 years, there's been quite an upwards trajectory in that waitlist. It's moderated slightly in the past sort of year or so, but that's not necessarily because the need isn't there. Like I said, there's been changes to those policy settings. So there will be some people who won't A, be eligible to go on the register, or B, might not bother trying to go on the register because they know they're not going to be prioritised for housing. So to answer your question, yes, that need is increasing. That's what we're seeing, but it's unlikely to be met by central government public housing.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, if they external places have access to funding, why are they not sort of heading towards that way? Is there a reason, do you think?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I capture what you're asking.
If they can access funding that we can't, but they're not rushing to go and build these houses, is that just a commercial thing where they can make more of it out on the open market as opposed to the social housing side of things? Joe?
I think I'd probably just say to that, Dan, as somebody who ran a community housing provider organisation previously, is that often they're not-for-profit organisations who don't have the money to actually do the build. So often they're organisations that end up either receiving grants from government if they're available, of which we know many aren't available that used to be available now. But also it depends on other organisations essentially gifting to them. And as Kayla said earlier, the settings for that, the availability for council to do that with its community housing to a chip is no longer available under the present settings.
Thank you for that. Yes, John, you've got a question or a comment?
Both, really. I'm just interested, I'm just trying to get my head around it, and I don't want to scare anybody, but there's a 15% discount as opposed to the commercial rate of rental. Is that what I understand from there? So how often is that adjusted, or when's it looked at? And secondly, I can't understand how our financial losses are expected when we have a 52-week of the year occupancy rate, we have a waiting list, and we're still saying that insurance, maintenance and depreciation costs are all right. Yes, they are. But under that scenario, under commercial systems, those guys aren't making losses, otherwise they have to sell the houses. They just couldn't make ends meet. So there's a dark area in there I don't quite understand.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, every 3 years they're set at 85% using evaluation, so that's at market rent. And then in the intervening years, it's adjusted based on sort of increase in costs. And so then that just gets spread across the portfolio. And then at the 3 years, it gets reset back up to the 85. And that's to try and make it manageable for tenants. So they're not, in the past, we've not done those incremental increases, and then they've been whacked with a large increase. So to try and make it manageable, we do that. In terms of the commercial sort of providers in this space, I guess as council, there's a couple of things going on, is that we can't access that funding, but there's also, the cost increases we're facing across the board, and some of those are disproportionately burden councils and might not burden a commercial operator in the same way. But I'd also add that what we're hearing from the people who do this commercially is that they're also struggling. And we also have a lot of landlords exiting the market. So it's not just a council can't continue to offer this kind of rental housing, is that even those big players or the small players, landlords, they can't afford to do it either. So I guess it's not just an us issue. I don't think that commercially it's hard to say, but whether it would be any more viable or not, we will, I guess, as we look through the options, that will be something that we look at. But yeah, we are burdened with those extra costs that commercial aren't, but even commercial ones are struggling. It's the take home.
Thank you for that.
Yes, Jim.
Just to be clear, it's just a simple, it's just a situation where the 85% formula doesn't cover costs. And if rents were to cover costs, that 85 would have to move up and become something closer to the market rate.
Yeah, so that's something that we'll be looking at as part of the review. And when we look at sort of the status quo option, we would look at changing things like the rental settings. But historically, in the past, when we've done modelling on putting the rent up to 100% of market, we still haven't managed to have the housing self-funding. There's still a shortfall.
Thanks for that, Kayla. Franz, you've got a question?
I don't know, a question or if it's comment, but if you're going to apply 85% of market rent, and then you go and have a look and say, what is actually the cost to council? Wouldn't it be far better to turn the whole system around and say, look, let's have a good look at what it costs the council and then apply the 85%. So, we're basically up for 15% of the cost, but I think that would be a fairer and more honest way, a more transparent way. Sorry, I retract the word honest, a more transparent way of operating, because throwing two things in the mix, to me, doesn't seem to be a transparent way of going. The other thing is, what is actually market rent? We are talking here about having these community houses in Oamaru, which are totally different again in terms of renting places in Palmerston or Hamden. So I just wonder whether it would just be better to go to a system of 85% of the actual cost, so that we know beforehand exactly what we're up against in terms of subsidising this.
Yeah, so if we went 85% of the actual cost, it's possible that we would be exceeding market rent, which would be illegal. So that's one reason we can't do it that way. But we will be looking at all the numbers and how we could configure things as part of the options. The other thing is when we're looking at market rent, that 85%, we use a registered valuer to make that determination so that it does take into account all the various factors, including location, whether it's in Palmerston, whether it's in Oamaru. And that's why at the moment the rents are different across the units. So they range. So we have, I think they range off the top of my head from 163.50 per week to 247.50 per week. So that does take into account all of those factors.
Yes, and then Sven.
Just then, follow up on that, Kayla, is that when the report actually come out, will we see that difference?
Sorry, what difference? Make sure I understand.
The difference between applying a formula that includes market rent and what the actual cost is to council.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we'll do some modelling under the status quo scenario or the policy adjustment scenario about how much of the cost would be covered if we were to set at market rent 100%. Yes.
Thanks for that, Sven.
Yeah, one question I'd quite like answered through the review, because we won't have that information today, but if we could see the cost of the property management aspect of it expressed as a percent of the rent, so that we could do a comparison against having that provided by the private market, that would be quite a useful thing to see.
Yes, that is something that we're looking at, but also the way that we structure at the moment makes that number not very straightforward to obtain because of the way the overheads are split across the property department. So yes, we'll endeavour to do that, but frustratingly, it's not as easy as we would like it to be, and hence why we need to take some time on this to make sure we can really get a good grasp on those numbers. But yeah, we are looking at that.
Yeah, fantastic. Understood. Thank you.
I think it kind of leads us into the next part of the presentation. Jim, is your question more in regards to the next?
Just very quickly, I think this is information that Victoria, I'm sure, can confirm that may be of value to newly elected councillors. This issue was actually canvassed in the LTP last year, and we did actually give people a couple of options in terms of the level of subsidy that we asked them whether they would support or not. And I can't remember whether it was a dollar sum per ratepayer or a percentage of total costs, but essentially we got a response from the community at large in terms of those who replied to the question, that they supported the idea of some subsidy, but I think the preference was for the smaller amount. I just can't remember what it was, Victoria.
That's correct. And we will touch a bit on the engagement shortly and to summarise that, what we've done in that space. But
Yes.
we did canvass it then. Yeah. Oh gosh.
You're well ahead of us, Jim. All right, we might move to the next one if there's no other questions about this particular part of the presentation.
Right.
Yeah, so some key considerations that will come through this review, and really happy to receive feedback on other things that might be top of mind, or as we progress through things that we don't want to miss. But really, these are three things that the staff working groups kind of been thinking would be top of mind to cover. So, we've talked about what is council's role in community housing provision. How should council fund this role? And and this is probably really important, is the current makeup of the location, the unit type, and the tenant mix kind of right going forwards? We've got units in Hemden and Palmerston and, all the way across the district, and varying levels of demand for those locations. In some places, you kind of need a car to get anywhere to go to the supermarket and things like that. Have we got them in the right places for where the demand is going forward? Oamaru's always been the strongest demand, and Palmerston's been a lot less, for example. So some things to think about if we're looking at breaking things up a little bit and not looking at it as a whole, but maybe looking at different options and different locations, for example. Happy if anyone's got any other feedback on that or things that you'd like to canvass through this.
Maybe we'll go through the first one because I think that would be quite good to hear feedback, like in terms of what is council's role in community housing provision. When we look back at the policy that was set, that is overdue a review, I think it's quite clear. And I think there's a desire, like over the past, to provide the social aspect for housing. So when we reconciled that with the financial aspect, like it wasn't perhaps such a priority back then, but now it's important that we look at everything. So that is becoming one of the key considerations that we actually need to put back on the table. So yeah, I'm interested in hearing from the members what they feel our role is in terms of the community housing provision. We might just step through and get some feedback from each of these just to help the staff give some direction. I know the finances keep coming up, which is really important for us to discuss, but at a high level, like what do we think, like about it?
I think that's got to be guided by the consultation, and I think it's handy having had that consultation in the LTP, and I think it'll be important to have consultation again later on in this process to see what's changed, and I think that'll probably guide us, and I think we'll be left with the job of making it work and making it work as efficiently as possible. And we should be open to, once we've got the role, we should be open to how we do it. Will probably be my thinking.
Great, thank you. Other members, Courtney?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really important thing that we provide the community, but I think we need to work out a better way to almost break even. It's obviously valued a lot by the community that we saw last year in the consultation. It would be good to work out a way to get government funding.
Again, I'm not too familiar across this subject, but is it also to put in the key consideration is the model of how this actually operates. And just by example, I know that there is people in Hemden that rent a house privately, but the rent is actually paid by a social security organization. So is the model that we have at the moment the best model to operate under, in terms of we provide the accommodation and we charge accordingly to whatever formula we apply? Is there other models available that we can pursue under the legislation?
Thank you for that, Franz. Jim?
Well, I think probably the answer to the question is our view of the future of community housing. Do we think there's going to be a greater need, and do we feel the council may have a role in meeting that need? And the answer, from my point of view, is to both questions is yes, but we don't necessarily have to be a provider. We can be a facilitator, particularly when you've got organisations like the Salvation Army and others who can access government subsidies and assistance that we can't. Now, that in and of itself would suggest to me that they may be ultimately able to provide better and or more appropriate housing than we can, because they have access to more money. There are lots of things we can do, in my view, that don't necessarily involve providing, but do involve facilitating. We can pursue the Queenstown model and make land available freely for people to build on, or low rental and recoup the cost of purchase over an extended period of time. There's all manner of things that, in my view, if we are creative, we can do, that I think would make expanded and perhaps more appropriate community housing a viable future option.
Thank you for that feedback, Jim. John.
It's a very complex question. We've got the facilities right now, so we've got to look after those. I don't think we don't have any choices about how that works. I think we're filling a role between the 2 or 3 major other providers, as in likes of the Salvation Army that's been mentioned, or the Observatory Village, or the private enterprise guys. I think we're sitting in that gap there. How we should fund it? If you're totally brutal in a business case, it's got to wash its own face. I think, everything we do has got to wash its own face, because we're collecting rates for the whole district. And I'm not being brutal about that, but I'm just saying we've got to look to make sure that it runs at the best it can. I'm not saying it's not, but I think we've got to look at all those targets. Do we need to build any more? Right now, as far as I'm concerned, we can't afford to. It's as simple as that. But I think we should be facilitating those that wish to in private enterprise and helping them as much as they can to get those consents and everything else they need to get through there to provide that housing. I don't actually think it's our job anymore to do that. I think it's the job of private enterprise, where there's an opportunity for an older age group to provide the likes of small townhouses and those other things that are around there to actually make it work.
Thank you. I've just got Dan, and then Joe, and then Sven.
I agree entirely with regards to the facilitation role. I think whatever can be done. I think there is a social responsibility here. I was going to ask the question: do we know what the average stay's not the right word? The average tenancy length is across the units? Because I mean, this is the thing. These are people's homes, and we're not talking about short-term stay. We're talking about longer term, and just thinking that given, the age of entry effectively is 60, you work up from there. It's how long a time are they fit for purpose for the people, the residents, the tenants who are in there, at that time, and then what's the next step from there?
Thank you. Joe, did you want to answer?
Yeah, I think there's some great points that have been made. I think I just wanted to add to the conversation the reality that New Zealand now is seeing more people over the age of 65 retiring with debt than we've ever seen before. So the people that are in these properties are over the age of 60, on very low incomes, probably without any assets and without any savings. And when you look at community housing providers, often the focus for them is not this age group. The focus for them are the young people. We know that the largest number of people that are on the waiting list for housing with Kāinga Ora are actually young people who are single, because they're not priority for housing. So that's why we're seeing homelessness become such an issue, and we're seeing that more and more in Waitaki as well. So I just wanted to indicate that these are the people that aren't going to potentially live a very, very long time, and this may be their last home that they're in. And if it were to be transferred to another provider, whether that be commercial or a community housing provider, this is not likely to be the group of people that would be selected to be in these properties by those providers. I'm just trying to make sure that we're considering that there are different age groups, different stages of life, and different considerations. And there's a reason why councils actually were put in this place of providing housing to this group. And that is because they were people who were more vulnerable, who were not likely to be chosen for housing either under Kāinga Ora or any of its predecessors or other potential community housing providers, nor are they likely to be able to afford to access accommodation such as the selective accommodation, like at places like the observatory, where they are under ORAs. They are not in a position to be able to afford those things. So it's a very unique group of people that we're talking about. So the options on the table are many, but the reality of the impact on this group is diverse. And so that's why council's in the place where it's in. And it's also why the community, I believe, see it as a social aspect of what they're paying for with some of their rates, because caring for older people who are in a vulnerable position is actually a really important thing for a community to do. And what we don't want to see, which we are seeing in some places, particularly up north, is people over the age of 65 being homeless on the streets.
No,
Sorry.
thank you for that, Franz.
I take on board what you're saying there, Joe, but we also live in the situation at the moment. We got to look at everything. And if I see what is happening within the country and pushed from our politicians there in Wellington, there seems to be this push of whatever you can do together as a single entity, rather than by having 3 or 4 or whatever this organization do by themselves. That is what the preferred option is at the moment. And look at our water infrastructure is a very good example, where basically they're pushing districts to go into CCOs. And I realise from answers that Kayla and Victoria have provided that the legislation at the moment puts an onus on council to provide this community housing. However, is it something that can come out of the review, and maybe part of the review that looks at the benefits of basically joining these housing provisions by separate groups, when that is the benefits of that being controlled and managed by a single entity? And therefore we come back to, and which I totally support, is facilitation instead of providing and also the maintenance that is there, because there must be financial benefits in terms of cost and efficiency if that was all organized by one organization rather than spread across 3. So the question is this something that can be reviewed as part of your review?
Did you want to answer that, Kayla?
Yeah, I think essentially with this review, all options are on the table. So the original council at the time encouraged us to be creative, and that's what we're doing. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at through the review is what would happen if we did, for example, use a CCO model, which is what some other councils have done, or what would happen if we did transfer the portfolio to a community housing provider. And so looking at that kind of option would be weighing up, well, if we were to transfer to a community housing provider and play more of a facilitation role, so through the transferal of the stock, and then they would actually provide the service going forward, what would the advantages and disadvantages be to that option? Would there be a way to, so one of the things I'm particularly interested in is if we were to do that, could that come with conditions that would require the community housing provider to invest in future supply? Because at the moment on our balance sheet, we're not able to invest in future supply. So if we were to transfer from one community balance sheet to another community balance sheet, would we actually be able to do that? And that would be more of that sort of facilitating and enabling role rather than us providing the service ourselves. So yeah, all options on the table. We just have to weigh up, the pros and cons, and also, what does our role look like?
Thanks, Kayla.
Thank you for that, Kayla. I think Franz kind of touched on, like even the consideration of an even newer model of almost like a super chip. Like he talked about the collective, and then considering what are the models from the water services entity, and then how could that be considered in the housing approach, more around the principles and the fundamentals of it. Jerry touched on the importance of making sure that there is security and provision for a demographic in our community that we can see the forecast is increasing. But how do we protect that for future use as well, but also look at other options of modelling? So really just kind of considering what outside the square kind of consideration within the modelling. So we could have some options that we could consider, we could partner, but we could also advocate. It's a general election year, like this year, the settings around the chip resourcing needs to be revisited. That should be one of the campaign, like kind of queries and questions that we should be considering. And then at the time of that, this review is anticipated to be completed, they would have had a year in as well. So the timing is probably actually quite good, and it gives us the time to consider different models for consideration at least. Thank you everyone for your input. It kind of leads us to the question 2 on financial clarity. What do we mean by how should council fund this role? Is there a role in particular? Are you meaning to lead the review, or if you can elaborate a bit more, please?
I guess it's just being clear on really how we acknowledge at the moment that there is some subsidisation required from council with the activity. Yeah, it's a general financial question, really.
Thank you, Sven.
I think we're seeing a bit of a theme around when money's short. People look at depreciation and go, that's just paper money. And then it is kind of just a book entry right up until it isn't. And I note that we haven't, they weren't depreciated up to 92, and then they are depreciated, and then they haven't been fully depreciated since 2020. However, we decide to fund it, and like I'm hearing lots of real good ideas about different ways that we might find some external funding and stuff, which is awesome. But until that point, I think we need to make sure that we've got the full appreciation of the cost. And so it's really good to hear that the work that Kayla's putting into the deep dive in the financials. But before we work out how to fund it, I want to know what it costs, including the depreciation, because we're not going to do anyone any favors if we get further down the track. A roof needs replaced and we've got the money to do it. Something like that. Some of those capital things are massive costs. So yeah, before we work out how we're going to pay for it, I want to work out what it actually costs in best practice.
Thank you for that. Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess, further to Councillor Thowning's point, that was sort of what stood out for me, I think, going through all this is, I guess, are we getting ahead of ourselves by kind of progressing strategic options before we actually have that really clear financial baseline to kind of go off? And so that was sort of what I was interested in, what information we need to kind of fill those gaps first to make sure that our decisions and our thinking is well informed and not sort of based on, personal or political kind of views. But yeah, and really interested also, I guess, to understand what other councils are doing, what works, what doesn't, where like that, what that wraparound kind of support could look like if we continue in our current role, but sort of add those partnership options there.
Thank you. I just wanted to re-clarify. Are we talking about, just for my own understanding, it felt like we were talking about two things. Funding the role to do the review. Is that what we're talking about, or just funding the review in general, the work of the review?
This is more about the actual activity of community housing, the activity of community housing, and I guess the evidence behind, and we're hearing that we need the evidence, and that's where we're doing that financial deep dive to get the evidence base in order to inform the options. Yeah.
Thank you for that. How about question 3, portfolio priorities, and welcome to Mayor Mel Tivendale and also CE Alex, who have just come in. We're just stepping through probably the 4th part of our presentation, just looking at key considerations for the review, just to help give the team some direction. So we're up to the question 3 around our portfolio priorities. Is the current makeup of our locations of them, the unit types and the tenants. correct, or is there any other additional feedback? Thanks, Ben.
Having sort of observed in the education sector when schools have been closed or merged or lost and then things change 10 years down the track, I think we'd be very careful about deciding we've got any surplus of community housing at any point in any place, anywhere. But a question I did have was, I know we've got 4 different categories of tenant, with A being the highest needs and I think D being more general needs. I was wondering if we could get some information in general without impacting anyone's privacy or anything like that, with the makeup of the tenants overall in percentage terms, perhaps, to work out what the current demand is, because that current policy has quite a good framework for those A, B, C, D.
So I don't have the percentages, but from my understanding, the bulk of our tenants are category A. Historically speaking, we have had more category B in Palmerston, where there has been lesser demand previously. So yeah, the category A is definitely the majority, that high need over 60 group.
Well, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other feedback or comments? We'll move on to the next one.
So this is our, oh, sorry, Victoria, did you want to speak to this or?
So he kind of
Getting a bit of feedback, sorry, on the sound there. So as we've just been through, we have that list of options that we're evaluating. So we're looking at things like the status quo, the service redesign, how might we change our rent setting approach, for example, the partnership delivery models, transfer to a CCO or partial or full sale of the properties, either on the open market or to an aligned community organisation. There's also the option of a combination of those approaches. So when we're looking at all of the options, we're setting some criteria against which we'll weigh those up. So at the moment, we've sort of put those in 4 sort of buckets. So we have our strategic alignment. So how does each option align with council strategy? The community impact. So is the current community housing provision fit for purpose? And here we're talking about impact on tenant wellbeing, present and future, as well as that wider community impact. And how does the decision affect future supply and supporting our changing demographic and community? And then we've got that funding piece, which we've gone over now, but how financially sustainable is each option essentially? And then also sort of some practical things around implementation. So is the option practical and achievable within a reasonable period, especially keeping in mind the impact on tenant wellbeing of this, of the review process, but then also the implementation of the preferred option down the line. And then also our capacity and our capability to meet to implement the option as well. So yeah, this sort of question speaks to how council wish to be involved in shaping that criteria, but B, also the weightings. So what would you like us to give more or less weight to when we look at those criteria?
Thank you for that. Any feedback or queries from the members? Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I put a bit of thought into that because it's quite a tough question. But at the end of the day, if we're going to do this, I think the tenants have got to be weighted pretty heavily. And I also think we can't ignore the financial situation council's in. And I think that's got to be weighted not much less than that, with all the other stuff needs to be in the mix, but perhaps weighted a bit less. So that's just my having looked at it with the limited information we've got so far. It might be revisited later after we've had more information from the review.
Yes, John.
Firstly, I'm welcoming this. This is great. It's a review of what we've got and looking at options of how we need to make it sharper and faster and better for the district. And I think it's great. I think a lot of what's been said today is probably a starting line of how we'd like to shape that criteria. And I think it works back to, as Finn said, there's a business case study here somewhere that needs to be, get the numbers on the table and see what we're actually up against. And I think that's a good starting point as anywhere. We're very fortunate that we have 100% occupancy. You know, a lot of businesses don't. So we're on the front page as far as that goes straight away. And we do owe those people there the right to actually do it properly.
Just aware I've missed parts of this conversation, so I might be missing some points on this one. But just thinking about the bigger picture, and I think we do certainly need to have something come back to us, and understanding who our people are and that mix is really important and how we protect that. But also just recognising that we can't get some of the government subsidies in this activity that other providers can get. So, you know, the partnership approaches, there are joining hands with other people in our community that can get that and have this chunked up a bit differently in how we look at it, which I think is probably the direction we're having, but we need to understand a bit more about what we are and what we're trying to achieve with it. But yeah, really pleased to have this conversation starting to happen. And when it comes to what role does elected members have in that, I think it is just when it comes down to understanding who our people are in those units and stuff, working on what our criteria is, because it's about that wraparound for the more vulnerable members of our community and making sure we're not leaving people behind.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just also mindful of the time. If we can, you've got enough feedback from that piece. I think it just builds into the overall review piece that everyone are quite interested in hearing back about.
So this last slide is just around, as important, around the engagement side, and this is acknowledges that through the review, late 2024, early 2025 to now, there's been ongoing engagement. We mentioned some, you know, the likes of Salvation Army, neighbouring councils, and through the Stronger Waitakere Network Housing Task Force. As Councillor Hopkins mentioned earlier, 2025, we did that initial engagement piece and through the LTP consultation. So at a high level, there was quite a broad support for council community housing, but there was definitely much more debate in terms of the level of subsidisation by ratepayers at that time. So we did pose some questions around some options. You know, how much are you willing to pay for this activity? It sort of ranged between $10 and $40, and it was definitely skewed towards more the lower end of that from the responses that we got for that. And that recognising that response might be different today to it was at that point, but that was an initial touch point that we had at that time. Just acknowledge that the tenants have been well informed through the review so far, and through our property team and the community housing work in that space. And recently, we just acknowledged that, you know, the review has taken a little bit longer than we'd hoped for, and that they've been advised of that. So that's always been at the front of our minds in terms of the tenant wellbeing. But at this stage, we're proposing to bring back to elected members a draft issues and options paper around September, October this year, with a view that by the end of this calendar year, we'll have some issues and options ready to go out for consultation early in the new year. Yet to determine exactly how that's going to work with that sort of link to the LTP engagement, but that's the sort of time frame we're looking at the moment in terms of this work. Yeah, that's sort of just a bit of a plan in terms of what we're looking at and the engagement to date. Is there any more questions on that at this point around engagement?
Thank you for that, Victoria. Jeremy, you had a question?
Oh, just really the sensitivity of the tenant engagement. I know last time when we were engaged with them, there was a wee bit of angst caused just with the confusion of what it actually meant for them. But we just had some feedback at the ratepayer meeting last night that the current letters that have gone out again have maybe been miscued by some of that community.
Sorry, I just missed the last bit of that, Councillor Holding.
I think there's a feeling in parts of those southern communities that the letter that went out about the review has been misinterpreted again. I know last time we had to go and speak to a few of the tenants and put them at ease, but yeah, there's some feedback we had last night.
Thanks for that. We'll certainly follow that up through our property staff, and yeah.
Yes, John?
Again, it's a perennial question, but why the timeframe so long? You know, this started in 2025 or before that, and it looks if we're not going to have a decision until 2027. Can we just squeeze that up? Because a lot goes on in those 2 years, and it's why are we taking so long to do this stuff? If you're in a commercial situation, you make that instant and might take you a fortnight, but you do it quickly. And why are we taking so long?
Thanks, Victoria. Excuse me. It's really important that we do this well, as Kayla said earlier, but also taking into consideration that we have a great deal of pressures on the team and they are prioritising their work, as we are encouraged to do, to make sure that we do things effectively in a more strategic manner. And so to come together as a team and make sure that we're doing a clear process, that we're communicating well and that we're doing this efficiently, that's the work that's been done to date, along with communicating with the community. We would not want to push it just to ensure that there was a timeline and actually end up getting this wrong. As you can see, it's an extremely important piece of work to be carrying out and making sure we have the right skills and capability around the table.
Thank you for that, Jim.
Hey, Joe, you may be able to answer this, or Alex. Or maybe even Victoria, the other complicating issue that may extend the amount of time required could be requirements to consult. I mean, if you look at our significance policy, I would have thought that this might be something that would require consultation, and it may even be a legislative matter on which we would need to consult. So can anyone confirm that or not?
Correct. The community housing is a strategic asset. So under the significance and engagement policy, we would need to do that full process. And that's what we're proposing to do early next year. Whether or not that's through the LTP or separate, we need to determine that.
Thank you for that. One more from John and then we'll close up from there.
Sorry, Joe, I take on board what you said, but I just wonder, you know, by the time we get to that decision, is it time to start all over again? I just, you know, things are evolving quickly and probably quicker now in the financial situation, not only for us, but for the whole country and the whole system. So, yeah, I'm still at a loss of, I understand we've got to get it right, but to get it right, we've actually got to start somewhere and get it out there. And if it's wrong, then change it so it's a living document.
Councillor McCone, absolutely take your point, and I know time is of the essence, but I also think that we've had, as a governance team, a huge amount on our plates as well. So trying to find a space in our diaries to actually bring this in front of us and have us be able to look through this, because I think quite often if staff go off too far in a different direction before they've had it in front of us, they can get a little bit pulled over the coals for that as well. So I think we need to be recognising that when we have incredibly packed Tuesdays for some time, it is really hard for them to find that space with us. And I think it's really important that we're brought on this journey and are leading it rather than feeling like it's happening around us.
Thank you. No more questions or comments.
Well,
we're 4 minutes over the time, so yeah, no, I just want to wrap up, you know, like in terms of where we're at. Thank you so much, John. Your input is very valuable. Just wanting to wrap up that this has been a really important and engaging conversation that we've had. Really appreciated everybody's feedback. It's valuable, both committee members and non-committee members. It's all valuable for everybody to develop that understanding in terms of the what and the why, but also understanding our portfolio and where it sits. And then also everybody feeding back in terms of what they would like to see in terms of the review that sits alongside the policy that has actually got good fundamentals, but it would good to include that as part of the overall review. We're very cognizant of the financials, but also aware of our social responsibility to the tenants and the community to be able to provide it. And yeah, we look forward to seeing all of the information and then just taking on board just the timeline pressures. I think what John is indicating is that it's an important topic for us to try and get over and to try and understand a bit more, but we also respect the pressures that our team are under as well. So it's an important topic for us, and we look forward to hearing the review in due course. And then those draft, that paper that's going to come later on this year. So I think that wraps us up for now. Thank you everybody for taking part and for your feedback. And thank you to the team for all your work that's undertaken. Thank you to Dr. Kayla Stewart for your work in the background as well and those online. Thank you.
Thank you.